When faith and trauma collide. A journey of love, redemption, and choices. Liam stood in the doorway, watching as the sun cast a gentle glow over Emma's face, softening the worry lines that had appeared only recently. She hadn't always looked so troubled. He remembered when her laughter would light up a room, her sparkling eyes bright with curiosity and mischief. But now, they were clouded, and her smile had faded into something sad, something tinged with the memory of things she wished she could forget. It had only been 2 months since that horrible night, the night that changed everything. Emma had gone for a walk in the park, something she'd done countless times before. But that evening was different. She'd been assaulted, her safety violated, and her sense of trust shattered. Liam could still feel the helplessness that had gripped him when she told him. His first reaction had been rage. He wanted to find the person responsible and make them suffer. But that impulse quickly gave way to a profound sadness as he realized there was nothing he could do to erase what had happened to her. Emma hadn't wanted to go to the police. She hadn't wanted to report it or even talk about it. Liam had offered to go with her to the hospital, but she'd shaken her head, refusing to speak to anyone about it. Instead, she withdrew, becoming a shadow of the person she once was. Liam, unable to force her into anything she didn't want, had stayed by her side, trying to be the support she needed, even as he struggled with his own feelings of anger, sadness, and helplessness. Every night, she would wake up screaming, her eyes wide with terror, and he would hold her until she calmed down, his heart breaking a little more each time. He'd seen her slip into dark periods before. Emma had a history of depression, but this was different. This was a pain that seemed beyond healing, a wound that refused to close. Liam couldn't help but feel powerless, his love for her both a comfort and a torment as he grappled with the weight of her suffering. A month passed like this, each day a blur of numbness and despair, until one morning, Emma found out she was pregnant. They both stared at the test results, the positive line a stark reminder of that night. Liam felt his heart sink, his stomach twisting with a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The baby was not his. It was a fact that lay between them like a silent chasm, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. For a moment, they'd hoped it was a mistake, a cruel twist of fate that would be proven false. But the doctor confirmed it. Emma was indeed pregnant. Liam watched as the realization washed over her, her face pale, her body trembling as she tried to process this new horror. The pregnancy was a constant reminder of that night, a symbol of everything she'd lost, and the pain of it was etched into every line of her face. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, each lost in their thoughts. Liam wanted to say something, to offer her comfort, but he didn't know what to say. He felt trapped, torn between his love for Emma and his revulsion at the thought of raising a child that would forever remind him of the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do, Liam. I don't know if I can live with this." Liam took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. They began to discuss the possibility of abortion. For Liam, it seemed like the only way for Emma to start healing, to put this nightmare behind her. But Emma was a devout Catholic, and her faith was deeply ingrained in her. The idea of terminating a pregnancy, even one born out of such a horrific event, went against everything she believed in. For a brief moment, they both felt a sense of relief, a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could end. But that hope was short-lived. Emma spoke to her mother, hoping for guidance, for understanding. Instead, her mother told her that abortion was a sin, a grave offense that would condemn her soul. She told Emma that no matter the circumstances, the life inside her was sacred, and ending it would be a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. Liam could see the conflict in Emma's eyes, the way she was torn between her faith and her trauma. It was as if she were being pulled in two directions, each one equally impossible. Her mother's words weighed heavily on her, filling her with guilt and shame. She told Liam that she couldn't go through with the abortion, that she had to keep the baby. It was then that Liam realized he couldn't do it. He couldn't see himself raising a child that would be a constant reminder of that horrible night. He loved Emma, But he couldn't compromise on this. He felt as if he were betraying her, abandoning her in her time of need. But he knew that he had to be honest with himself. So, he told her that if she chose to keep the baby, he would have to leave. Emma's reaction was immediate. She broke down, begging him not to leave, her tears tearing at his heart. But he couldn't back down. He tried to explain his feelings, tried to make her understand that this wasn't a decision he was making lightly. He wanted to be there for her, but he couldn't see himself raising this child. He couldn't see himself living with the constant reminder of her pain. In the end, they parted ways, their love shattered by circumstances beyond their control. Liam left, feeling as though he'd lost a part of himself, a part that he would never get back. He tried to move on, but the guilt and sadness lingered, a constant ache that refused to fade. But that wasn't the end. A few days later, Emma called him, her voice filled with desperation. She told him that she had spoken to her mother again, hoping for some comfort, but instead, her mother had doubled down, telling her that if she went through with the abortion, she would be disowned, cut off from her family. Her mother's words left her feeling trapped, as though she were being forced to choose between her faith and her sanity. It was then that Emma made a decision. She told her mother that she would go through with the abortion, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her mother would understand. But instead, her mother blocked her, cutting her off completely. Emma called Liam, her voice filled with relief and sadness as she told him everything. She would go through with the abortion, and though it was a painful decision, it was one she felt she needed to make for her own well-being. Liam felt a mixture of relief and guilt, knowing that his ultimatum had played a part in her decision. In the weeks that followed, Emma began to heal. The abortion was a painful experience, but it allowed her to begin to move forward, to put the trauma behind her. She and Liam spent time together, reconnecting in a way they hadn't in months. They talked about everything, about the pain, the guilt, the anger, and in those conversations, they found a sense of closure. Emma's mother never forgave her, never reached out to mend the rift between them. But Emma found peace in her decision, knowing that she had done what she needed to for herself. She and Liam rebuilt their relationship, finding strength in each other as they moved forward, their love tempered by the trials they had faced. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the horizon, Liam knew that they had come out the other side stronger than before. They had faced the darkness together and emerged, scarred but whole, ready to face whatever came next. And in that moment, he knew that as long as they were together, they could overcome anything. The Price of Generosity, a story of sacrifice, family, and unexpected bonds. Have you ever found yourself stuck in a situation that you chose out of love and solidarity, only for it to turn into a burden that affects every part of your life? Today, I'll tell you a story of tough decisions, personal sacrifices, and what it truly means to support those we care about. But, more importantly, this story will make you question where to draw the line between helping others and protecting your own peace of mind. The story begins with a man who, after marrying his beloved wife, Amber, makes a selfless choice alongside her to help Jennifer, Amber's best friend, who is facing desperate circumstances. Jennifer's husband is completely irresponsible, refusing to take any role in raising their daughter, Harper. He has abandoned every parental duty, preferring to spend his days glued to sports, drinking, and dismissing any emotional or financial responsibility. With no other option, Jennifer turns to her best friend, and together, Amber and her husband open their doors to give Jennifer and Harper a refuge. In the beginning, this act of generosity feels noble, almost inspiring. But as time goes on, it sets the stage for a series of internal and external conflicts. Amber and Jennifer's friendship is deep, more like that of sisters, so Amber's compassion and commitment to her friend are strong. But her husband finds himself carrying an ever-growing emotional and financial load that begins to create cracks in his own sense of stability. As the weekends roll by, he notices the dynamic in his home shifting. The time he used to spend with his daughter, Emma, on Saturdays has become shared with Harper. Emma and Harper have become inseparable, but this newfound bond is bittersweet for him. Every Saturday, the special moments he had planned for his daughter are now influenced by Harper's presence, and slowly, his frustration begins to fester. The financial costs add to his emotional weight. Jennifer, who barely manages to make ends meet, has little means to contribute. So Amber and her husband cover everything, from dance classes to Mother's Day gifts. It's not about the money, though. It's about principle. These additional responsibilities pile up, leading to stress, exhaustion, and resentment. And despite his efforts to stay calm, he starts to feel like he's raising someone else's child. Eventually, his patience reaches its limit, and he confronts his wife. He admits he's tired of bearing the responsibility of another family, of raising a child that isn't his. The honesty of his statement sparks an immediate reaction from Amber, who fiercely defends Jennifer. She feels her husband doesn't understand the depth of Jennifer's troubles, and is hurt that he could feel this way after everything Jennifer has been through. The tension builds, and Amber spends the next nights sleeping in a separate room, leaving a stifling silence hanging in the house. It's a conflict many of us face. The desire to support those we love versus the need to protect our own mental and emotional well-being. He's conflicted, knowing that Amber's intentions are pure, yet he cannot shake his own feelings of exhaustion and frustration. He wonders if he is wrong for feeling this way, or if there's a limit to selflessness that should not be crossed. But just when he's at his breaking point, Amber shares with him the full extent of Jennifer's situation. Jennifer isn't just dealing with an irresponsible spouse. She's in a truly desperate, even dangerous, position. Financially and emotionally drained. She has nowhere else to turn. Her marriage is a trap, a source of unending hardship, and she finally realizes that staying with her husband is doing more harm than good for both her and Harper. This revelation hits him hard, making him realize that his earlier frustrations pale compared to Jennifer's struggles. With this new perspective, he no longer sees Jennifer and Harper as a burden, but as individuals in genuine need. Amber and her husband decide together that they will provide a safe space for Jennifer and Harper to rebuild their lives. Even so, adapting to this new reality is no small feat over time. The man finds small pockets of joy in this altered family life. The relationship between him and Harper transforms. He initially saw her as a complication, an obstacle in the way of his relationship with Emma. But slowly, Harper begins to open up to him, and they bond over something as simple as building with Legos. This pastime, initially just a way to pass the time, becomes a precious routine where he provides Harper the fatherly attention she's been missing. It's through these quiet moments that he sees Harper's enthusiasm and creativity blossom, and he feels proud to be a positive figure in her life. Despite the initial struggles, he finds unexpected satisfaction in his role as a mentor for Harper. He realizes that his sacrifices are helping someone in real need, and that discovery changes his perspective. It no longer feels like a burden, but an opportunity to make a difference. Meanwhile, Jennifer's life takes a turn for the better. She manages to enter a nursing program, something she has always dreamed of but never thought possible. This step not only gives her a goal but provides hope for her and Harper's future. The program is demanding, requiring her to balance study, part-time work, and raising Harper. Yet, with the support of Amber and her husband, she begins to see a way out. The couple's home adjusts to this new routine. Amber takes on extra tasks, helping with Harper's schoolwork and managing household duties to give Jennifer the time to study. Although it's a heavy load, Amber does it gladly, her friendship with Jennifer deepened by their shared experiences. Jennifer's studies progress, and there's a sense of relief knowing that, after graduation, she will finally be able to support herself and Harper independently. For the husband, this long-term goal brings him peace of mind, a way to mentally and emotionally manage the sacrifices he's made. And despite all the changes and challenges, he still reserves time for his own daughter. He makes sure that Emma doesn't feel overshadowed, taking her to dance and fencing classes and carving out their own daddy-daughter moments, just as he always intended. This balance reminds him that he can be there for others without losing sight of his own family. But as the story goes on, the situation with Jennifer's husband, who tries to avoid child support and plays dirty legal tricks, adds a new layer of stress. Each legal battle and court delay threatens to break Jennifer's spirit, but she pushes forward, determined to complete her studies, gain independence, and finally leave her toxic past behind. Through all this, he learns an invaluable lesson about the balance of self-care and generosity. Initially, He struggled to find any time for himself, but over the months, he carves out moments to recharge, enjoying hobbies that allow him to reflect, decompress, and renew his mental strength. This self-care not only keeps him sane, but enables him to continue helping those he loves. It's a vital reminder. Taking care of oneself is essential, especially when supporting others through hard times. As Jennifer gets closer to graduation, the couple sees a future where she can move out and start fresh. The husband reflects on the sacrifices he's made and realizes that, despite the challenges, he wouldn't change his choice to help. The experience has not only strengthened his marriage, but given him a newfound appreciation for resilience, compassion, and family bonds. He watches Harper thrive in this stable environment, noticing how much she's grown since they first welcomed her into their home. Emma and Harper's friendship has flourished, and seeing both girls blossom has been an unexpected joy. Harper no longer clings to Emma. She has developed her own interests, her confidence growing with each passing day. And so, he learns that sometimes, the greatest lessons come from the moments when we become the support that someone else desperately needs. His story serves as a reminder that helping others can be tough, but the emotional rewards can be immeasurable. So, I'll leave you with this thought. How far would you go to help someone in need? Unexpected confessions, a family bound by secrets and hard choices. As the story unfolded, life for Michael and his wife, Jenna, had seemed close to perfect. Married for a decade with 2 young children, their days were full of familiar routines, family gatherings, and shared responsibilities. They were close-knit, not just as a couple, but as an extended family. Michael's sister, Claire, and her husband, Dan, were frequently part of their lives. They'd all been friends since college. Claire and Dan had married a few years later and were now parents to 2 children of their own. Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and even impromptu get-togethers were the norm. For years, they'd built a solid foundation of support and mutual respect, a family where everyone trusted each other implicitly. That trust would soon shatter in a way none of them could have anticipated. One Thursday afternoon, Jenna received a surprising message from Dan. He was asking to meet her for lunch. "It's urgent, and I need to talk to you alone," he'd written. Jenna mentioned it to Michael, expressing curiosity rather than concern, figuring Dan might want advice on something. Perhaps he and Claire were going through a rough patch, she reasoned. Michael, too, found it odd but chalked it up to the openness they'd all shared. After all, they often confided in each other and offered advice when needed. With a quick nod, he told Jenna to go and see what it was about. The next day, Jenna met Dan at a cafe near her office. The atmosphere was crowded and bustling, a comfort as she took a seat by the window, looking up to see Dan enter, looking anxious. She waved, and he came over, putting on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They chatted casually at first, exchanging updates on work and family, but Jenna could sense something beneath his usual demeanor. There was a restlessness about him. As their lunch arrived, Dan paused, took a deep breath, and began speaking in a low voice. "I have to tell you something," he said, glancing away. He started with a compliment. "You look great, Jenna." "You always do," he added, his voice sounding almost rehearsed. Jenna laughed it off at first, thanking him casually. But Dan's words didn't stop. He began describing how he'd admired her for years, how he felt things for her he couldn't explain. "I knew from the first time I saw you that you were someone special, that you'd be the kind of woman any man would be lucky to have." His voice trembled slightly, and Jenna froze, realizing that this wasn't just a compliment. He was confessing feelings he kept hidden for years. "If you were mine," he continued, "I'd treat you like a queen." Jenna sat there in shock, struggling to process his words. Here was Dan, her brother-in-law, the father of her niece and nephew, married to her sister, saying he'd been in love with her for years. He went on, telling her how he'd felt this way since their college days, admiring her from afar, deluding himself into thinking they shared some hidden bond. "I thought maybe you felt it, too," he added, looking at her with an intensity that was nothing short of unnerving. Jenna quickly stood up, nearly knocking her chair over in her haste to leave. "I don't know what you think is happening here, Dan, but this is wrong," she said firmly, grabbing her things and heading for the door. Shaking with anger and disbelief, She called Michael on her way back to work, telling him everything. Michael was equally stunned, listening to Jenna as she recounted Dan's words, his professed love, and the uncomfortable intensity with which he'd spoken. Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could someone he considered a brother, someone he trusted for so long, betray their family like this? But before he could gather his thoughts, Jenna's phone buzzed again. Dan was texting her. "I'm sorry," the messages began, full of pleas for forgiveness. He claimed it was only infatuation, that he'd misinterpreted signals, that he was ashamed. Then, another text, "Please, don't tell Claire." Michael and Jenna sat at home that night, reeling from the revelation. Jenna was insistent that they tell Claire immediately, but Michael hesitated. The weight of what this could do to his sister's family, to her children, seemed unbearable. But as Jenna reminded him, hiding it wasn't the answer. "Imagine what else he might be hiding," she argued. Reluctantly, Michael agreed, and they prepared themselves for what was sure to be an emotional confrontation. But things took a shocking turn when Claire, distressed and heartbroken, called them first. "I don't even know how to tell you this," she began, her voice thick with tears. Dan had gone to her, claiming that Jenna had been the one to initiate things, that she tried to start an affair with him. He painted himself as the innocent one, the victim of Jenna's supposed advances. Michael and Jenna could barely believe it. They tried to explain, to counter his accusations, but the damage had already been done. Claire was hurt, confused, and torn between believing her husband and trusting her brother and sister-in-law. That night, Michael called his parents and younger brother, explaining the situation in a blur of words. Their father was furious, their mother stunned but resolute, vowing to support Claire through whatever decision she would ultimately make. Their younger brother promised to help look after the children, providing a steady presence amidst the chaos. The next day, they all gathered at Claire's house. Dan sat outside on the porch, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. He knew that the truth was out, that his attempt to shift the blame had failed. Jenna handed Claire her phone, allowing her to see the messages Dan had sent after their lunch meeting. One by one, Claire scrolled through them, her face hardening as she read each apology, each pleading message. Finally, she turned to him, her voice cold. "Pack a bag. I want you gone." Dan tried to argue, but Claire cut him off, her voice full of controlled anger. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better." She turned away, pulling Jenna into a hug, a small comfort in the midst of the heartbreak. They had been best friends since college, and Claire's loyalty to Jenna was unwavering. As Dan stood there, broken and defeated, Michael joined him, his face set in anger. "You need to leave," he said firmly, watching as Dan nodded and turned to pack his things. That evening, Claire and Jenna talked late into the night, both heartbroken but grateful for each other's support. They began to piece together details from the past, realizing that Dan's obsession had probably begun long ago. His seemingly innocent jokes, his tendency to linger near Jenna at family gatherings. It all took on a new, disturbing meaning. Claire decided to search through his laptop, hoping to understand the full extent of his betrayal. Her hands shook as she guessed his password, her heart pounding as she finally gained access. Inside, she found something chilling. Photos of Jenna, hidden in folders that seemed ordinary at first glance. The photos dated back years, capturing Jenna in candid moments, most of which she hadn't even realized were being taken. Some were from family vacations, one set from a beach trip they'd all taken together. In each shot, Jenna was the sole focus, her figure and face captured in a way that felt invasive and wrong. Claire's shock turned to horror as she realized just how deeply Dan's fixation ran. She showed Michael and Jenna the photos, her face pale. They were horrified, struggling to process the violation. Jenna had trusted Dan implicitly, never imagining he could harbor such an unhealthy fixation on her. As they looked through the images, Claire's resolve hardened. "This isn't just about infatuation," she said quietly. "This is something else entirely." They began discussing legal action, considering restraining orders to protect their children and themselves from any further harm. Claire decided to confront Dan one final time, involving Jenna and Michael to ensure that no lies or half-truths would be tolerated. They set up a call, each bracing for what might come next. As soon as Dan's face appeared on the screen, the tension was palpable. He looked exhausted, eyes swollen and red. Slowly, he began to speak, admitting he'd been obsessed with Jenna for years. He explained how it had all begun innocently, how he'd been captivated by her personality, her laughter, her kindness. But over time, his feelings grew, warping into a fixation that he couldn't control. He detailed moments where he'd found ways to be near her, hoping to catch glimpses of her, to feel some connection he'd convinced himself was real. Jenna and Claire listened, their expressions a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Claire finally spoke, her voice icy. "What made you think my sister would ever want you over her husband? Over our family?" Dan stammered, grasping for excuses, but it was clear that his delusions had fed his actions. Jenna ended the call abruptly, unable to bear hearing any more. For Claire, the aftermath was a painful process of healing and rebuilding. She knew her marriage was over, but her priority became protecting her children from the fallout. She spoke to a lawyer, gathering evidence from Dan's emails, texts, and hidden photos to ensure she would be granted custody. Although Dan had pleaded with her to let him explain, to see his actions as a mistake, Claire's love for him had evaporated, replaced by a fierce resolve to shield her family from further harm. Dan returned to the house only to pack his things, moving into the guest room temporarily while legal proceedings began. In the weeks that followed, Jenna struggled with guilt, feeling as though her friendliness had somehow been misconstrued, as though she'd somehow led him on without knowing it. She confided in Michael, sharing her fears and regrets. But Michael, ever supportive, reassured her, reminding her that the responsibility lay solely with Dan, not her. Despite everything, Jenna and Claire remained close, their bond stronger than ever. As Claire continued to gather her life back together, she focused on her children's well-being. She explained to them, in age-appropriate terms, that their father wouldn't be living with them for now, and began arranging for them to see a counselor. The process was painful, but necessary, a step toward healing and building a new future. For Michael and Jenna, their marriage grew stronger, tested but unbroken by the ordeal. They learned to navigate the scars left by Dan's actions, leaning on each other for support as they moved forward. Jenna blocked Dan's number, cutting off all contact, though one evening he tried to reach out through an email, pouring out apologies and detailing his misguided emotions once more. It was a disturbing reminder of his obsession, but they chose to forward the email to Claire and her lawyer, adding it to the growing pile of evidence. As time passed, Claire began to find peace, her focus shifting entirely to her children and their future. Although the family had been fractured by Dan's betrayal, the bonds they shared held firm, helping them through the dark moments. Slowly, they rebuilt their lives, learning to trust again. And though the wounds might never fully heal, they grew stronger as they faced the future together, determined to leave the shadows of the past behind.